Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson and in this video we are going to be continuing our look through of the Deadspace art book. So we left off near the end of the weapons section last time, so we are going to be continuing from there. One thing just before I start the deep dive into the book, I apologize. My cat has decided that today is the day that she will sing the song of her people. So if you can hear any meows in the background, that is what that is. I will try to edit them out in post as best as I can, but if a few slip through the cracks, that is what it is. So let's get started, and as always we have my eyedrop bookmark. At this point I'm just going to keep using these because they're like a staple of this channel at this point. So yeah, let's dive right into it if I can find the page that is. Oops, okay, here we go. So last time we left off on talking about the plasma cutter and with this image here of Isaac Clarke with his plasma cutter. Not going to reiterate all the stuff we talked about with the plasma cutter, but yeah, best weapon in the game. Here are some more information. So not going to spend too much time on the weapon crafting system, but the basic rundown of it is in Deadspace 3, there was an option to craft weapons, and you could have two weapons in one, essentially. So, for example, you could have a plasma cutter as the top gun, and then a ripper gun on the bottom. So you could have two weapons in one. This weapon has spawned a lot of controversy in the community. I personally am not a fan of it. Just because in Deadspace, each weapon serves a specific purpose. You know, the plasma cutter is your general workhorse weapon, the line gun is your shotgun, and stuff like that. But with the crafting system, it essentially just means that you can make whatever gun you want and have an all-purpose weapon. So if you make a gun that's good, you never have to swap between them. Also, and I think I mentioned this before, in Deadspace 1 and 2, each weapon has a specific ammo type that drops randomly from enemies and in containers. So for example, if you're only using the plasma cutter in a run, and you get ammo for the ripper gun, it's not worth picking up because it takes up an inventory slot and it's for a weapon you're not using. In Deadspace 3, however, they replaced this with just an all-purpose ammo item, which is ammo for every gun. It's a universal ammo type, which for a horror game, if you can even call Deadspace 3 a horror game, it is absolutely awful. So yeah, couple artworks here of some of the types of guns that you can craft. This is an example of the crafting system here. So you have your main gun on top and your secondary gun on the bottom. Yeah, so not going to spend too much time since we've already talked a good deal in weapons. So this is some more weapons. So this is a new section, the vehicles of Deadspace 1 and 2. So it says, the first Deadspace was set inside one of the most epic vehicles that the series would ever produce. But the move to the sprawl meant that the artists were able to explore a wider range of machinery, from urban commuter transport through to an EarthGov gunship. Deadspace 2 introduced a new wave of vehicles that upheld the rough-hewn future aesthetic prevalent throughout the series. So, as far as I'm aware, in Deadspace 1, the only vehicles are the ship that we arrive on, the tram or the train that we use to get from mission to mission, and then the ship that we escape on. I can't remember if that is the same ship that we crashed into the Ishimura on, and of course the Ishimura itself, but it is a vehicle since it is a ship. However, it's more of an environment as far as gameplay goes. And yeah, the Sprawl has a lot more vehicle stuff in it. Not going to go in depth on the Sprawl now because there is a section dedicated to the Sprawl later on, so I just wanted to save that for that section. I believe, but I am not completely sure, I think this is actually the tram that we use in Dead Space 1. I'm not sure, so if I am incorrect, I do apologize. This is the vehicles of Dead Space 3. Dead Space 3 moves away from the shiny, bright spread of the Sprawl and the paint of a grimier, grubber version of the future. The vehicles that patrol it are caked in more dirt and are more functional in their design, beaten up, second-hand rides that are all on the cusp of falling apart. Yeah, especially in the first couple of missions, I believe. There's like a lot of vehicles that you see that are more of civilian type vehicles, and there is a set piece at the very start of Dead Space 3 on a moving train. It is actually a pretty cool sequence. Credit where credit is due. As you guys well know at this point, I do not like Dead Space 3 at all, but the train set piece is very good, even if you are just killing soldiers, not necromorphs. These are some more of the vehicles that we find. These are vehicles that we find in Tower of Atlantis, which is a snowy environment. So all of these vehicles are well degraded and also covered in snow. In brief, this basically just says that the robust machinery from a lot of the shiny violence of Tower of Atlantis landscapes seem to have the better some of Dead Space 3's vehicles. Snowplows, snowmobiles, and heavy-duty rigs are all part of the beaten-up look of the series. And yeah, it's very true. It is interesting, actually, in Tower of Atlantis seeing all of the leftover vehicles from when humanity had a little outpost there. But that's not it. That's about it, and they don't really serve any purpose outside of that, apart from just objects in the environment. Here is a bit about the doors. So it says, behind every door. Every decent horror film and games knows the dramatic potential of the locked door. Every player knows to expect the worst on the other side. Dead Space happily indulges in this convention, locking away chambers of terror behind thick, creaking doors. This inspiration, sorry about that, I lost my train of thought, though often comes from the mundane in Dead Space 2, some doors were inspired by Bay Area transport paths. That is very interesting. So yeah, Dead Space 1, and I'm pretty sure 2 as well, but just for Dead Space 1, there are many locked doors in the environment that you used a resource called nodes to unlock, or upgrade schematics. However, the trade-off is these same nodes are also what is used to upgrade both your weapons and your suit. So you have to kind of make the decision on what you want to use it. That, is it worth keeping the nodes to upgrade yourself? Or is it worth spending the nodes to maybe get some health? Maybe you're in an instance where you have no ammo and barely any health left, and you come across a door and you think maybe what's on the other side of this door might be the difference between me living and dying. So it's a very cool system where you have to make a choice, which I am always a fan of, and I think Dead Space pulls this off spectacularly. Okay, the marker and unitology. So I'm just moving this a little bit closer just so I can see. So death is only the beginning. The twisted backbone of Dead Space's universe is unitology, the religion that is a driving force in the series' narrative. Formed at the midpoint between our own present day and that of Isaac Clarke's, the Church of Unitology is a faith that is built around the markers, the mysterious spiraling monoliths that punctuate Dead Space's story. Although it started as a cult, as laid out in Dead Space Martyr, a prequel novel set 300 years before the events of the first game, by the time of the USG Ishimura makes contact with one of the markers, Unitology has spread to every level of society. The core beliefs are simple. Unitologists see the marker as a way to open up convergence, an event that builds towards ultimate unity. What exactly that entails begins as as an enigma before becoming grotesquely vivid. The events that tear through the Ishimura and the sprawl rebuke the beliefs of the Unitologist as sickly, twisted flesh. So here we have some of these scribblings of the Unitologists and a bit about them. So just before we continue, quick little bits of information about Unitologists. So it doesn't say it outright here, but Unitologists essentially believe that turning into necromorphs essentially make you enlightened or ascended to godhood, for want of a better term. So they want to activate as many markers as possible and turn both themselves and the population of whatever space station or planet the marker is on into necromorphs. Also, during the events of Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2, I'm pretty sure in Dead Space 3 as well, but I've blocked most of Dead Space 3 out of my mind. We, the player, know that the Unitologists are crazy and out of their mind. However, what Dead Space does excellent is it also gives a reason why Isaac does not like the Church of Unitology. So Isaac is an engineer, as you know. However, he's an extremely gifted engineer, so very, very skilled and very, very qualified. That's why he's, going to, or I was part of the repair crew sent for the Ishimura because of how qualified and how skilled he is. However, Isaac's mother was a part of the Church of Unitology, and she gave all of her money to the church, to Isaac's both dismay and distress, and because of this, Isaac had to attend a lesser school of engineering compared to one of the higher schools that he would have been more fitted to. So a real world example would be, attending community college instead of, say, Harvard or something like that. So I just like that as a fact because a lot of the time in games, we, the player, have a reason to not like an enemy faction or something, but the player character, in this case Isaac, doesn't always have an in-game reason why they are opposed to it, whereas Dead Space pulls this off very, very well. And if I remember correctly, all that information about Isaac and his family is in, it's either data logs or external media. I can't remember where I read it, but it was an external source. If I can find it, I will link it in the description. Aegis 7. So, Aegis 7 is the planet that the Ishimura was in the process of planet cracking before the events on the Ishimura took place. And this is where they discovered the marker. So, Aegis 7. The planet of Aegis 7 is to Deadspace's mythology what LV-426 is to the alien universe. I actually don't know what that means. I am not as informed on the lore of the alien universe as I would like to be. So, sorry if I don't have any comments to say about that. I'm just, unfortunately very ignorant when it comes to the Alien franchise. Not that it's not good, I just kind of haven't been exposed to it that much. So, the pivotal point in a friction that has since stretched out both forwards and backwards in time. It is where the USG Ishimura carries out its fateful final mission, and where a red marker is discovered with catastrophic results. Aegis 7's significance is further underlined as Deadspace's story unfurls. It is not only where the Ishimura first encounters a red marker, but also where mysterious, covert experiments take place, and where the roots of the twisting conspiracies are uncovered. So, yeah, the marker has a very, it almost looks like a double helix, and it has a good blend of looking both mechanical and organic, which I think just adds a lot more to the kind of cosmic horror look to it. Here are some of the different concept arts of the markers here. I'll move this a little bit forward, sorry. Let me zoom in a bit so you guys can see. And yeah, not all of these are good, not all of these are bad. However, I think the final design for the marker is perfect. It looks intimidating, it looks otherworldly, it looks terrifying, and above all, it looks like something that is deeply, deeply ancient, which it is. Okay, here we have a couple of things, so let's just start with the the passage up here. Rather than being a moment of spiritual beauty, convergence is a messy, dirty affair. The markers emit frequencies that can send people into madness, be it violent psychosis that sees communities tearing each other limb from limb, or slow, creeping insanity that afflicts Isaac. The same frequency turns dead flesh into necromorphs, and once enough have been created, they gather around the marker in an act of convergence, leading to a new stage of necromorph evolution. So yeah, this is just what I was talking about with the bit about the unitologist's belief. So here we have a slasher necromorph with a bit of a light behind him, kind of giving him a bit of a highlight. Here's Isaac firing his plasma cutter at, I believe this is a downed slasher based on the spikes on its limbs. It might be another type of necromorph, I am not sure. And here is a picture of the red marker as it is being moved along the conveyor belt on Aegis 7. Let's move on. Unitologists. So, sorry about that noise. The grandiose, majestic unitologist ship from Deadspace 2 is as good as a signifier as any of the religion's status, sway, and financial power. What started off as a cult has, by Isaac's time, evolved into a belief that has touched its way to some of the most powerful companies. The Concordance Extraction Corporation, or CEC, are the owners of the USG Ishimura and are strongly linked to the Unitologists, who are responsible for sending a ship full of believers to the fateful mission. So yeah, as you explore the Ishimura, you find a massive section of the ship is dedicated to a church for the Unitologists, which is very interesting. So, This is some of the Unitologist vehicles. As you can see, very, very fancy compared to the other vehicles that we have seen in the book so far. And here are some of the Unitologist soldiers and militia that we fight in Deadspace 3. So let me read what this says. I'm just moving this quickly so I can read it. It's important that we don't come across as kooks, Ian Milhelm says, of one of the Unitologists. We tried to have people that were more reasonable in their Unitologist beliefs and reasonable in their perspectives of it. If they came across as a crazy cult, that's just not that interesting. That much is certain, or that much certainly is true in the earlier games, where well-meaning companions expressed Unitologist beliefs. In Deadspace 3, however, Isaac encounters a more aggressive and militarized faction of the religion. So yeah, and these are some of the soldiers here. As you can see, they have a much more paramilitary look to them, as opposed to the UEG soldiers that we find in Dead Space 2, which just kind of shows that these guys aren't part of any official army. They are part of the faith militant, for want of a better term. And their weapons are another example of this. They don't have the fancy pulse rifle of the UEG soldiers. They have some kind of much more, looks like put together from spare parts weapons, which I think fits the whole militia vibe a lot better. Okay, now we are getting to the good stuff. This is the part of the book that I have been most looking forward to covering, the necromorphs. So let's read what it says at the top. I'm just moving it a little bit closer, just so I can see, because for whatever reason I find the text in this book to be very hard to see. So, twisted anatomies. Every monster movie needs its monster, and every horror story needs its boogeyman. Dead Space boasts some of the most hideous monsters and some of the creepiest boogeyman in the shape of necromorphs, the fractured mutants that are Isaac's main foes. Quote, what we were trying to do, as much as possible, was reference real-world things that gave us an emotional response, describes Ian Milhelm. We wanted the necromorphs to evoke injury, actual people that have been injured, as opposed to exotic aliens. For horror to really work, it needs to be relatable. The Predator is a big alien, for example, but he's not scary. Big aliens aren't scary. Yeah, depends on the alien, in my opinion. The necromorphs, though, most certainly are. Inspiration came from some obvious sources. H.R. Geiger's Xenomorph, and most pertinently, the warped abominations are seen in John Carpenter's The Thing. But from some less obvious places, too. Parasite fungi and the sticky effects it can have was one of many such sources. Over the course of the series, the necromorphs have been served up in some increasingly unsavory flavors. Come to the climax of Dead Space 3, they also reach the ultimate dread-inspiring form. Not gonna say what that is yet, because I'm pretty sure it is covered later on, but if it isn't, I will touch back on what this means. So here we just have a picture of a necromorph. Just by looking at this one, I'm not sure what this necromorph is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be a necromorph from the games or just kind of an image of a general necromorph. It kind of looks like a slasher, based on this little bit here. It kind of looks like one of their claws. I just need to zoom out a little bit, sorry. But yeah, let's dive straight in. Here is a horrifying picture of a necromorph. So this looks like a slasher based on these claws. The slashers are the basic enemy type in Deadspace. Now, do not mistake basic enemy type for easy enemy type. Slashers, especially on the higher difficulty, are extremely dangerous and extremely fast. Over here we have one of the types of necromorphs. These are essentially crawling heads, or crawling head-shaped necromorphs, and what they do is they attach themselves to corpses, and if the corpse has the head, it removes the head. If the corpse does not have its head, it does the same thing, which is it inserts itself into the head opening, connects itself to the vertebrae and nervous system and stuff, and then reanimates that corpse, which is extremely, extremely graphic. Here's a picture here of what looks like, I can't tell what position this guy is in, but this used to be a person with this massive tentacle monstrosity coming out with half of the head and what looks like a little bit of the spine. This enemy, to me, always reminds me a lot of the Plaga from Resident Evil 4, just based on the human body with a massive tentacled monstrosity bulging out of the head, or where the head used to be in this case. Here are some more pictures of some necromorphs. So this necromorph, I can't remember its official name. I believe it's called either the Crawler or the Reaper. And what they do is, as you can see here by this picture, they have two very elongated arms, which they use both as arms for grabbing and also as their legs. They also have this tail, which they use as a means of attack. So these enemies can crawl on any surfaces, so the floor, the walls, the roof, and are even very effective in zero gravity. They leap at Isaac, either pinning him to the ground, or if they get close, they will whip their tail at him, causing massive damage. These enemies are really cool. Not my favorite necromorph, but definitely a very cool design. And I'll probably say this about half a dozen times in this section, but these are one of my favorite necromorphs. I just think their design is very, very cool. So here we have a picture of a necromorph, and it says at the top, early concepts of the necromorphs had a translucent, swollen quality to them, like a bloated corpse. That is actually what I was just about to say based on this image here. That had washed up ashore, such as a Carlos Hontes grotesque figure below. I apologize if I butchered your name. The look came from the aquatic influence that was put on side, only to be returned to in later games. Expanding on the necromorph concept, Ben Winot explains, I ended up doing hundreds of concepts of creature design, and I started building these prototypes that I animate so people could see their intention. Very cool. So this necromorph here, I do not believe is featured in any of the games. I might be wrong about that. It has been a very long time since I have played the Dead Space games. But I can't remember seeing one like this. But it is a very cool and almost has a very traditional vampiric appearance with the skin and the eyes. This guy actually almost has the same skin tone as I do, which is embarrassing. By the way, I know it said up here that this is based on a bloated corpse washed ashore. If you don't know what that looks like, please don't look it up. It is not nice. Just assume they look like this. Yeah. Mutants Rising. So here is a necromorph type, which is very interesting. So these guys have no offensive attacks. So they have no weapons, they have no claws, they won't leap at you and pin you to the ground. However, this appendage here is an explosive. So what they do is they shamble towards you, and they have a very strange, lopsided gait to their walk. And as they get closer, they throw themselves at you, and this detonates. On the harder difficulties, this is a one-shot. So you can dispatch these guys in a variety of ways. You can do the usual thing of shooting off their limbs and then just finishing them off. You can shoot this appendage here, which explodes and kills them instantly. However, my favorite way of dealing with these guys in Dead Space 2, since you have the kinesis ability, is you can sever the arm here, and if this sac is still intact, you can pick up the arm with kinesis and throw it at the enemy or any other enemy, and it also explodes. So here we have a massive necromorph here. This guy looks like a regenerator, but I cannot be 100% sure. Here we have some more pictures of a slasher. What qualifies a slasher is these massive spike appendages, which are, they protrude from the back or the shoulders, which is just a horrifying design. And this necromorph here looks to be some kind of man. He appears to be wearing like a gas mask of some sort, but as you can see, his limbs are twisted, his arm or his hands are disfigured, and there's tentacles coming out everywhere. Very, very cool. Okay, this is probably my favorite page in the entire book. So let's read what it says, and then we will talk about the necromorphs. So it says, from a distance, necromorphs are terrifying. Up close, they're truly nauseating. There's broken teeth, compound fractures, and things like that. We tried to make the bad guys as if someone had taken a human body and had it bent and broken the wrong way. Rather than it stretching, it snaps. So these images here are truly, truly horrific. So we have this necromorph here who has his entire face gone. All you can see is his teeth and parts of his skull. You can see his nose, or where his nose used to be here, and an empty eye socket, and all of these protruding bits of flesh and tentacles. This guy here, and actually all of these, you know what, I'll save that until we cover them all. So this one here appears to have been a woman with her lower face removed and replaced with this grotesque mockery of gums and teeth. Massive gums, if you can even call that a gum, or maybe that's just a piece of flesh. And instead of normal human teeth, there's about 5 massive teeth. These two on the left are a bit blunter, whereas these 3 over here are very sharp. This man here has had his skin flayed on the front of his face, and now has this mouth-looking thing, I don't even know what you would call this, with kind of a bulbous growth in the middle, which is very, very cool, as it is disgusting. And this one is my favorite of the bunch. So this one is almost like a mixture of all of these. So we have his skin pulled back or missing and very saggy. We have some spikes coming out of his forehead. His lower jaw has been removed. You can see some of his teeth here. And then these 2 massive, massive fangs, which are very cool. And over here is a picture of someone who was in some kind of suit, based on the look, I'm assuming that this is a UEG soldier rather than someone in Isaac's engineering gear. And obviously, as you can see, their suit has been breached. The faceplate is cracked. You can see the teeth here are all bent out of shape and deformed, and then many tentacles coming out of, I don't even know where they're coming out of, but somewhere near his face. What I wanted to say was this guy here, if you have played Halo 4 and have played the Infection game type, this design reminds me a lot of the Flood in that game, or the Infected in that game, just based on the facial shape, the tentacles, and especially the teeth here. Maybe that's just me, but that's the first thing that came to mind when I saw this gun, but very, very scary. Here's a section dedicated to slashers, so let's read what it says first. Brett Marling is an artist with the grisly task of working on the necromorphs. Twisting bodies beyond breaking point is work that comes with its own unique challenges. I have anatomy pages open, but at the same time, you can't be too constricted, or you'll drive yourself nuts worrying about how things fit together. You have to break and bend and pull apart all the body parts. There's also the study of animal parts to bring into new elements of it. So all of these guys here are slashers. So this design here looks the most similar. Actually, these ones and these ones look very similar to the slashers that we find in the game, whereas these four down here appear to be concept art of the slashers. So what the slashers have, like I mentioned, is they either have the arms transformed, or the arms have almost become emaciated, and these spikes come out of their back. As you can see with this guy, his arms are down at his waist, and these spikes are coming out of his shoulders. What's cool about some of these concept arts is you can see two different designs for them. So this guy here, the second from the left, has his hands still and his arms are twisted. However, he has spikes coming out of his wrists. The spikes obviously aren't as large as the slashers we ended up getting, but a very cool design nonetheless, and also has two spikes coming out of his belly. This guy over here is my favorite of the concept art, just based on how unique it is. So this slasher appears to still be, for the most part, noticeably human. You can look at this and say, yeah, this was definitely a human once. His arms are twisted in the same position. However, these spikes appear to be coming out of his palms, and the spikes are a lot smaller, much more akin to daggers, whereas these guys have almost swords in terms of length. Very, very cool. I think an experience that people have had in Deadspace, universally, I certainly have, is because Deadspace is focused on dealing with limbs, whereas most horror games are focused on dealing with the head. You know, a situation that I encounter, and like I said, I'm sure a lot of other people have, is, you know, you'll enter a hallway, and at the end of the hallway will be a slasher, and as the slasher turns to you and starts charging at you, you revert back to your standard horror game instincts, and you shoot him in the head, and his head falls off, and you think, oh, I killed him. And then the slasher continues to keep charging at you, despite not having a head, gets to you, and impales you and rips you in half, which is very, very funny the first time it happens. I've spoken to a couple of people who have said that same thing happened to them, so I'm sure this has happened to everyone at least once while playing the Dead Space games. The variations of Dead Space 2. So the Dead Space 2, we get a lot more new necromorphs, as well as redesigns of some of the classic necromorphs. So, the variations of Dead Space 2. The genealogy of the necromorphs was extended dramatically in Dead Space 2. Brutes joined crawlers, reapers, and lurkers in a grim rainbow variety. A species developed demands a different outlook in the design. That was kind of different, confesses Brett Marlene. Most of the necromorphs are people-sized. You have to come up with how all of these bodies fit together and merge to form this giant, nasty thing. You still want to keep that human element because that's what makes a necromorph scary. You can see them as human in there. So, here are the types of necromorphs that we have. This necromorph, I think, looks like a type of regenerator. I'm not sure, I might be wrong about that. I'm just basing it on the folded back arms and the two little appendages here that almost look like T-Rex arms. This enemy is based on this is a child that has been turned into a necromorph. And have these massive clawed hands. These guys attack you in swarms. They die in one shot from essentially every weapon. However, they swarm you in great numbers and are extremely fast. So it's very easy to get overwhelmed by them. And if they close in on you and jump on you on the higher difficulties, it is essentially game over. This necromorph here is a boss that we fight in Dead Space 2 called the Tormentor, who pursues Isaac through the sprawl, and we eventually defeat him by sending him into outer space and then dealing with him in anti-gravity. I like this picture here because it shows a kind of size comparison between the Tormentor necromorph and a human. So I'm assuming this is like Isaac compared to the Tormentor. This enemy here is a brute who is in Dead Space 2. He is also, it might not be a brute, but a prototype of the brute is also featured in Dead Space 1. These enemies are very tough. Shooting them from the front is pointless. You have to wait until they charge at you and then shoot them in the back on their weak point. If you have played Halo 3, these guys remind me a lot of the Flood pure form tanks, just based on how they move. But yeah, these guys they're not quite bosses, but they're almost mini bosses. And yeah, having a good amount of stasis is very, very helpful for defeating these guys. So here we have a couple more types of necromorphs, so we'll start with the text as always. There was an oft-repeated tale about how the original Dead Space got its design inspiration from looking at car accident photos. It turns out it is something of a myth, but the truth is no less disturbing. I was wondering if they were going to bring this up. So, okay. We bought a goat at the butcher's, Ian Milhelm recalls. There's actually footage of the goat in the front end of the first Dead Space, where we were pulling it apart and sticking our hands in it. We were trying to get it that contrast between pallid skin and insides, old blood versus new blood, and all that kind of stuff. Fish blood was also really good. It's very dark and it coagulates, and it got a real thick viscous quality that is kind of horrific. So yeah, that is a little bit of a darker part of the development of Dead Space. So essentially, the team bought a goat, butchered it, and then digged around in its insides for how to both, or inspirations for how to design the necromorphs, and also how they would look, cut up once Isaac has shot them to bits with the plasma cutter. This is kind of a bit of a controversial thing. A lot of animal rights activists are not happy with this at all. I'm not the biggest fan of it personally. I'm not a big animal rights activist guy myself, but killing a goat for a video game just doesn't really fit right with me. However, this enemy type here, which is one of the charging enemies, so what I believe this is one of the charging enemies, sorry. What these guys do, I think I actually mentioned them in part 1, is they hide behind, or they might be called stalkers, I apologize if I get the names wrong. They hide behind cover, and they have a very calcified forehead. So they hide behind cover, and they attack in packs, and they come out of cover and charge at you and knock you down, and then run away and hide again. They make no sound except for when they charge, they emit a high-pitched screech. But yeah, very, very cool enemy. And I don't know if it's just me, but its head, or its skull at least, kind of looks like a goat skull. Not including, the horns and these bits here. But yeah. So this type of necromorph. Real life and somewhat grisly influences remain in Dead Space. I reference textures of meat, admits Bread Marling, who appears to have become an eccentric regular at his local butcher's. I'll go to the grocery store and buy the meat that's on the manager's special and scan it in, and it'll be all green and nasty looking. So yeah, this necromorph type, I can't remember if it appears in game. This might be one of the spore type necromorphs. If they appear in game, please let me know. But yeah, these look very sickly, very infected, especially this type here. But this enemy type here looks really cool. I believe this is just concept art, but it is like a mixture of half-infected body type with shrunken appendages, and then this massive, almost like a spinal cord that then becomes like a tail with a massive spike on it. Very cool. One thing about the necromorphs that I find very interesting is, because necromorphs are dead or made from dead flesh, in universe and in the lore, they actually cannot be killed. Now, obviously, in the Dead Space games, Isaac is able to kill them because, being able to kill an enemy is essential for a horror game and games in general. But in the lore, you actually cannot kill them. That's where the whole limb thing comes in. So because they're not able to kill them, the best thing that people are able to do is cut off their arms and legs, and maybe their heads in some cases, so that they're just a torso, or a head and a torso with no limbs that can actually not hurt them. But that just makes it much more terrifying. Your usual zombie type enemies can be killed either by damaging their body enough, or shooting their heart, or shooting their brain. But the necromorphs, because they're essentially just masses of dead tissue, cannot actually be killed, which is just a little bit of information. Here is a enemy type which is super, super cool. So we will read what it says first. We ended up with a look that's almost like an uncontrolled growth, says Ben Wanat. You end up seeing people with more limbs than they should have. with ribs sticking out in places they shouldn't be. It's almost like someone took 5 or 6 different bodies and stitched them all together. The uncontrolled growth described by one ad comes to a chilling conclusion with this 3-limbed necromorph boss. So this is a boss that we fight in, I believe it's Dead Space 2. I cannot recall the name of this necromorph. I genuinely apologize. But what's cool and also terrifying about him, so we'll look at this picture first. So he has 2 massive arms that he uses as legs, and then a back leg which is also used as a tail. It almost looks like a beefed up version of the Reaper type enemy, but as you can see, he has lots of bits of human body parts attached to him. So we can see here there is a naked woman, or what's left of a naked woman, on his chest. We have 2 arms sticking out here. We have a head on his left arm. We have a head down on his right arm, much further down. And we have another woman here who is attached to it or conjoined to it. And same design here. We have the woman on the front. There's actually another person on the back here. This one looks like more like a man, but maybe that's just how the angle is. This guy is chest down on the necromorph, and also we have the same heads here, the other woman here, and the arms. So extremely, extremely terrifying. Say what you want about Dead Space, even if you don't like the games, the necromorph designs are incredible. Here we have some more enemies. These are some more of the spore types that we saw a little bit earlier. This is a picture of Isaac fighting them. So what these guys do is they shoot out little pustules at you, and you have to shoot them in their glowing spot, which is kind of like the bulbous head. So here is the drama of Dead Space 3. So it says, Isaac's previous adventures were hardly short by drama or on show-stopping set pieces and spectacular action from for Dead Space 3, as Isaac works his way towards unearthing the truth behind the necromorphs and the markers, and the story builds towards an apocalyptic crescendo. Visceral Games designers had to up the scale and up the threat. The broader landscape of Tau Volantis, the first time that Dead Space's game has had an entire planet as a canvas, which is true and is very cool. We do spend a mission on Earth in Dead Space 3, but Tau Volantis is a whole other thing, and yeah, it's a very, very cool environment. Again, not a Dead Space 3 fan, but credit where credit is due. An entire planet as its canvas. It enables this, and also allows that the introduction of a new alien species, as well as reimagined versions of old favorites. But it's not just a case of making bigger bosses and tougher enemies. For Dead Space 3, the threat had to be that of a much more profound nature. So, what this looks like here is multiple people here. So these 2 guys are running away, and we have 2 people here. I'm assuming these are soldiers shooting their weapons at. This looks like one of the alien species that is native to Tau Volantis. I can't tell if this is a alien species that is still itself, or this is that same species that has been converted into a necromorph. I can't tell from this design, but its design here is very serpentine looking, with a massive plated forehead and 4 eyes here, which is very, very cool. Okay, now this is a very interesting enemy. So in the original Dead Space, hunters were some of the most formidable of Isaac's foes, biologically mutated necromorphs that boasted regenerative powers and the ability to soak up more punishment than their less powerful relatives. In Dead Space 3, they're even more deadly, and scarred with symbols from the marker that's drawing them towards their ultimate purpose. So the hunter is a massive, massive necromorph. He looks like a massive version of a slasher. You can see some concept art of him here. These appear to be different versions of his head that were in design. This looks to be kind of similar to the final product. However, I like this one the most here, like the 5 little eye appendages with the mismatched spikes, and then different variations of him up here. So this one here kind of has a human body that's more hunched over. This one here looks more skinnier and more in line with your typical slasher. And then these two look very similar to the final result. So he is a massive necromorph, and he has almost like these runes etched into him. The hunter is comprised of multiple beings or multiple slashers. So whereas a normal slasher is one person that has been transformed into a necromorph, the hunter is a combination of about 3 or 4. So his biomass is massive, and you can actually see on his back when you fight him that he also has a pair of ribs on his back, because there's a person that was kind of assembled into him from the back. As it says here, he is a regenerative enemy that kind of chases Isaac. He almost acts as a pursuer, very similar to Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. And we eventually defeat him by bringing him in front of a type of engine, turning it on, and then turning him to ash, therefore negating his regenerative abilities. But yeah, he follows you throughout the game, so the best course of action is to either shoot off his arms or shoot off his legs and then run, and then he'll regenerate and keep on following you. So very, very scary enemy and an absolute menace to deal with, especially on the higher difficulties. I know I keep mentioning the higher difficulties. That's just because my playthroughs of Dead Space have always been on hard. I just find it more fun. So, what I find fun about it is it makes every single type of necromorph a threat. So none of them are a pushover, from the massive boss of the Regenerator to the simple slasher. All of them can end you in 1 or 2 hits. Most of the time 1 hit, but yeah. Here we have some feeders and fodder. So it says, "It is always nice to welcome a new member to the family, even if the family's a ragtag bunch of mutated corpses, and you're introducing a mummified stranger. Feeders are Dead Space's 3's addition to the Necromorph clan. They have their roots in the series past. Some of the very first concepts I ever did were mummified spacemen on a spaceship being taken over by corruption," Benwanat shares. "Maybe because I did those things so long ago, as the creative director on the 3rd game, I really wanted to do necromorph mummies. There is something really creepy about mummified remains that trigger something different in you than a recent dead person. They've got their own creepy vibe. I went back to those images that I liked and decided that it would be nice to do a full-on pantheon of necromorphs based on that notion. So these are, like it says, mummified remains of enemies, of soldiers and workers that we encounter in Dead Space 3. They are very frail, very easy to take down, but they are very fast and again come in numbers. What makes them difficult is they are extremely thin. I'm talking like they have no muscle or fat or anything. They're essentially just a head and a spine and bones. So actually targeting them can be a real pain. We have a couple of different variations here. So this necromorph is a standout of the bunch, and this is a type that did make it into a game. This necromorph actually wields weapons as opposed to having growths that he uses as weapons. So this guy is using two types of axes or snow climbing gear, which is just very cool that a necromorph is using weapons. This guy looks to be a modified slasher type, so instead of the spiked appendages coming out of his arms or his back, his legs have been replaced with them. So he's almost like a combination between the slasher and the leaper, which I think is very, very cool. This one down here, his head, from the mouth upwards anyway, looks very intact. However, his mouth is extremely deformed and has these like saber-tooth-like teeth, which is terrifying. I imagine being bitten by this guy. Oh my god, that would be awful. And then here we have a very close-up of the feeder enemy type. As you can see, very mummified. His eyes are cracked and covered over with either cataracts or they're just gone. His nose is gone. His teeth are gone. He has something in his mouth. His hair is gone or missing. Very terrifying. And this is the second necromorph that has the same skin tone as me. So maybe there's a marker near where I'm living and I should probably move. Okay, let's continue. So here are some more necromorphs that we find in Dead Space 3. Some of the classic necromorphs types are reimagined and redesigned for Dead Space 3, with pukers and slashers being lent a little more grisly detail. The fodder is also available in more powerful elite variety. They've got the dryness, that gaunt feeling, Brett Marlene says, of the fodder, that sometimes we could play with Dead Space 3 because we have this new texting format. This is all new feel and sound. So here we have some different variations of the spitter and the slasher. So this guy here is obviously the slasher, and this guy here is the spitter. They're called spitters because they spit acid at you, or some kind of acid. It might actually just be bile, but very damaging and very disgusting. This guy is very, very interesting. So, as we saw back here, this feeder or fodder, whatever you would like to call him, is just in standard clothing. So this is just what the person died in. However, these enemies, so this slasher here and this fodder here, I can't remember if they're called fodders or feeders. It says fodder here, so I'm just going to call them fodders. If they are called feeders, I apologize. But anyway, these guys are in military gear, and very heavy military gear by the looks of it, which makes them a pain to take down and very difficult to dismember, because you're not just shooting through, tiny bones. such as in the slasher here, as you can see, it's just bone and sinew. So one shot from the plasma cutter, cuts that right off. Whereas this guy has all of his armor on, which makes it more tough. And what's interesting about this is because he is in full armor, he looks, for the most part, human, because we can't see whatever way he mutated when he turned into a necromorph. We don't see what his hands look like. We don't see if his stomach is sprouting tentacles or anything, because he's still wearing his gloves and his chest piece. Yeah, as much as I dislike Dead Space 3 and hate the human type enemies, the additional necromorph types are actually pretty cool. And stuff like this enemy, this type of fodder, is just a very creative way of making it seem like, these were real people that have been transformed, and some of them are in completely undressed, some of them are just in, civvies, and this guy is obviously in his armor. Okay, let's move on. So here, before we get into it, let's just read what it says. Swarm infectors are another of Dead Space's 3 delightful additions, small, scuttling creatures that prove hard to pick off with standard weapon fire. They have rather charming ability to reanimate corpses, turning down bodies into vicious, flailing necromorphs. It is an addition that does much to change the way that battles play out in the game. So these guys here are Dead Space's 3 version of the necromorph type that I mentioned at the very start of the game, of the necromorph section, the ones that take over corpses by assuming control of their head. It says here, at some points, Dead Space's debt to classic sci-fi is more explicit than others. The swarm infections creeping into the host body and reanimating of reminiscent of Alien, while the dismembered heads crawling across the floor borrow from the thing's standout moments. Dead Space's fluency in sci-fi cinema only helps strengthen this vision. And here we have a little diagram of the necromorph form entering a corpse, so it enters through the mouth. These guys remind me of two things, especially this design. They remind me of the head crabs from the Half-Life series, and they also remind me of the flood infection forms from the Halo series. Now, I'm just going to try and move a little bit quicker through this section, because we have already passed the 1 hour mark, and I don't want to end the video until we are done with the necromorph section. Okay, long live the new flesh. Necromorphs look great on the page, but they truly come alive through animation, whether it's the quick slither of a leaper or the hunched scuttle of a lurker. The creation remains a sickly puzzle. It's taking a person and twisting them as much as possible, says Brett Marling. I often compare it to Lego. It's tearing apart a person and then putting them back together. So here we have another version of a type of Reaper enemy. As you can see, we have its 2 arms and its tail. This guy has a lot more of a mutated mouth, kind of similar to the Predator's mouth, with all of these spiky growths coming out of him, both on his face and on his back and neck. The introduction of a new alien species means a new type of necromorphs arrive in tandem. Without the human anatomy holding back the process, alien necromorphs are more abstract in design, and in some ways more horrific. One enlightening point of reference during the creation of the alien species was Art Forms of Nature, a 19th century book featuring lurid geometrical depictions of sea life of German artist Ernst Haeckel. I apologize if I butchered your name. I know I butchered your name. I don't know why I said if. So yeah, so this enemy type here is a boss that we fight multiple times in Dead Space 3. We fight him twice, and each time he runs off before we can defeat him. However, in the final encounter, we defeat him with the help of Carver. So these necromorphs here are the Tau Volantians, the natives of the planet Tau Volantis. As you can see, these are more of the necromorph forms. So there's a bit on Tau Volantis later, but what I'll say now is Tau Volantis and Tau Volantians were another civilization that encountered the markers and eventually succumb to their onslaught and infection, leaving many in kind of suspended animation, the ones that survived, and the rest have been fully turned into necromorphs. A new breed. The aquatic theme that pre-located beneath Deadspace's first concept designs finally surfaced with the extinct aliens of Tau Volantis. I like the idea that they're using telekinesis, and sharks have their electrodes all up in their faces. So I was trying to add that element to it to give them this hammerhead kind of look, which is very, very true. Sorry, where was I? This hammerhead kind of look, explains Brett Marling. What it boiled down to, I was having this intelligent but somewhat aquatic look. So here and here, this is what the Tau Volantians normally look like. This is just them as they were, whereas these pictures here are them after becoming necromorphs. And you can see, even for an alien species, you can see just how much they have disfigured it, which I think is always a challenge for making something that doesn't look human be obviously looks like there's something. Okay, so this is covering something called the Necromoon. On designing the Necromoon, Wynat explains it was not just about making the biggest monster we could. It is the culmination of everything that the game's about. It's far more than just a big monster in the sky. It's tied to the overreaching fiction completely. So these kind of moons are the final form of the necromorphs. What these moons are, they're not actually moons. They are a massive biomass of all of the necromorphs of a planet or a system. So once a planet has been completely overrun by the necromorphs and all life has fallen, they all get sucked up into orbit and they become one with one of these moons, which is very, very terrifying. Here's a little picture. We have Isaac facing down some enemies. The Blood Moon's design makes explicit the influence of the aquatic life on Deadspace's designs. Part inspired by a squid and part inspired by a jellyfish, the end result looks like a feverish imaginings of an 18th century sailor, and recalls the fantastical representation of sea life seen in that period. Again, the German artist Ernst Haeckel was a reference point for the artists. Here is another picture of a very disgusting looking necromorph. What's interesting about the moon is that it ends up being the fictional wrapper for the entire necromorph race, but also the markers in general. Explains from that. They have a message that runs through all three games, but it takes all three games to explore it and make it clear. We needed a big hook fighting for life on a planet of death for a long analogy. The Necromoon also gives great visual presence throughout the game in addition to the mystery of, quote, how the hell that could happen to a moon, and what that would mean for the rest of the universe. It's a nice visual metaphor for all that Deadspace is about. So here is another picture, kind of looks like a moon in forming. I'm not sure what this type of necromorph is, but it looks very Lovecraftian, almost like something out of Bloodborne, I think. Here's some more pictures of some more of the advanced stages of necromorphs. I'm not sure what this enemy type is called. I'm not even sure if this enemy actually appears in the game. But it looks very similar, in my opinion anyway, to the Pale Moon presence in Bloodborne, which is the final boss for the true ending. Maybe that's just me because, you know, everything I see looks like Bloodborne. I'm so much of a fan. Another picture of Isaac fighting a type of necromorph here. It says, throughout Dead Space's history, the guidance of H.P. Lovecraft's imagination can be subtly felt, I would say more than subtly felt, and it's writ large across the sky in Dead Space 3, Blood Moon, feels as if it has just stepped out of Lovecraft's own Cthulhu mythos, calling to mind the great old one, the huge beasts that are worshipped by the twisted human form. What the moons also remind me of is I'm a big manga reader, and for those of you who have read Junji Ito's book called Remina, it is extremely similar to the moons. The short little synopsis I'll give is a planet enters the solar system and people are sent to go investigate it, and they all lose contact. And spoiler alert, by the way, for Remina, so skip about a minute if you don't want spoilers for it. But it ends up that this planet is not a planet, but a planet-sized predatory organism that is headed straight for Earth, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it, and it ends up consuming the Earth. So I believe this book was published by Junji Ito before Deadspace, and I'm not sure Junji Ito is familiar with Deadspace, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But I can't help find the coincidence between the two. And here is the sprawl, and this, everyone, is where we are going to leave off for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your viewership. As always, I'm going to try and make this a 3-part series. However, it may be a part or a 4-parter depending on how long it takes. If it's either going to be 2 shorter videos if it's a part 4 series, or 1 longer video if it's a 3-part series. So thank you again for watching. If you are listening to this while falling asleep or trying to relax, this is the end of the video. So I would turn the video off now so the ad does not interrupt you. I'll give you a few seconds to do so. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching or listening to this as much as I enjoyed making it. I adore Dead Space. It's my favorite horror game, and we will continue our look through this book in a future video. I'm actually going to record the next part directly after I finish this. I want to try and get this book wrapped up tonight. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. My name has been Crimson, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.